The searing pain hit me like a bolt of lightning, radiating from my core through every nerve ending in my body. I cried out, gripping the bed rails until my knuckles turned white. The contractions were coming faster now, intense waves slamming into me. "You're doing great. Just keep breathing," the nurse encouraged. I tried to focus on her calming voice, using it as an anchor against the agony. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the sharp cries of a newborn pierce the air. "It's a girl," the doctor proclaimed. Relief and joy flooded through me as they placed my precious baby girl into my arms. Her tiny fingers grasped at mine as I held her close. In that moment, all the pain dissolved away. I looked up to see Nolan, my husband of 5 years, staring down at us. But instead of the loving gaze I expected, his face was etched with tension. His eyes flickered with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "She's perfect," I whispered, tears of happiness trailing down my cheeks. Nolan gave a curt nod. "Get some rest. I need to make a call," he said abruptly before slipping out of the room. A gnawing feeling began to take hold in my gut. Something wasn't right. Ever since I had gotten pregnant, Nolan had grown increasingly distant and cold. It was a stark contrast to the man I fell in love with, who had once been my biggest supporter. I tried to push away the dark thoughts creeping in. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Nolan returned half an hour later, his jaw clenched. I searched his face, looking for any trace of joy or excitement, but found none. "Who was on the phone?" I asked. He avoided my gaze. "No one. Look, we need to talk." I noticed he was still wearing his wedding ring, the plain gold band I had placed on his finger 5 years ago, the one he promised he would never take off. But now it seemed like a lie. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Nolan stood rigidly at the foot of the bed, his eyes cold. "This isn't working. I've tried, but I can't do this anymore." His words dropped like stones in the pit of my stomach. "Do what exactly?" "This." He made a gesture with his hand. "I'm in love with someone else." The room started spinning. This had to be a nightmare. "What are you saying?" I whispered. He shoved his hands in his pockets. "Her name is Cassidy. We've been seeing each other for months. I'm going to be with her." Suddenly, the past year replayed in my mind on fast forward. Nolan's unexplained absences, his emotional distance, it all clicked into place. Rage boiled up inside me. "You cheated on me while I was pregnant with your child." He stood there, stone-faced. "Cassidy was there for me in ways you weren't." The audacity of his words stole the breath from my lungs. I glared at him with every ounce of loathing I could muster. "Get out," I seethed. "Get out before I call security to drag you out of here." For a moment, Nolan just stared at me. Then, without another word, he turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him with dreadful finality. I looked down at my innocent baby, still cradled protectively in my arms. Nolan had turned his back on us, but I would never abandon my child. A steely resolve rose up within me, cutting through the shock and anguish. If Nolan wanted a war, he would get one. I would make him regret the day he ever betrayed us. The next few days passed in a haze of feedings, diaper changes, and sporadic bursts of sleep. My thoughts constantly drifted back to Nolan's cruel revelation in the hospital room. I replayed the scene over and over, analyzing every detail. The cold detachment in his eyes, the matter-of-fact tone as he declared his love for another woman. My best friend Juliana came to visit often, helping around the house and providing a sympathetic ear. I found myself obsessively recounting Nolan's betrayal to her, as if speaking the words aloud might miraculously change them. "That bastard! I never trusted him," Juliana declared, her eyes flashing. "Don't waste another second worrying about that snake." I sighed, adjusting the swaddled newborn in my arms. "I just don't understand how he could do this. We were so happy once." Juliana shook her head. "People show their true colors eventually. He never deserved you." I thought back to the early days with Nolan, how he used to surprise me with flowers, how we would stay up all night talking. When had it all gone wrong? "I ignored so many red flags," I said quietly. "The late nights at the office, the locked phone screen. I feel so stupid." "This is not your fault." Juliana squeezed my shoulder. "Nolan chose to betray his vows. Don't let him make you feel guilty, too." Over the next few weeks, I tried to focus on healing both physically and emotionally. But lingering doubts continued to plague me. I needed proof of Nolan's affair, some tangible confirmation that this Cassidy person truly existed. One evening, Juliana arrived on my doorstep, eyes blazing with fury. That asshole thought he could keep his little secret contained at the office. Well, it's all out in the open now. She revealed that she had discreetly investigated at the company where Nolan and I both worked. Rumors of his affair with a younger colleague named Cassidy had spread like wildfire. "It's definitely the same woman he mentioned," I said bitterly. "He wasn't even trying to hide it from people at work." Juliana nodded. "I'm so sorry, Alara, but at least now you know the truth. He doesn't deserve your tears." Hot anger pulsed through me as reality sank in. Nolan had paraded his mistress around, utterly unconcerned about my pain or public humiliation. I pictured his smug face and felt pure loathing wash over me. He had slipped the knife in my back when I was at my most vulnerable. Well, it was time I returned the favor. A week later, I was finally discharged from the hospital with strict instructions to rest and recover. As I settled into my bedroom, a sense of peace washed over me. For the first time since that wretched day, Nolan destroyed our lives. I had just finished nursing the baby when the doorbell rang. Still sore and fatigued, I slowly made my way downstairs. I froze when I opened the front door. Nolan stood on the porch next to a slender blonde woman I could only assume was Cassidy. Before I could react, they brushed past me into the foyer. "What the hell are you doing here?" I demanded, blocking their path. Nolan glanced around impatiently. "I'm here for my things. Cassidy will help me pack up." I gaped at them. Did they think they could just barge in and take over? Cassidy gave me a disparaging look. "We're here to take the baby, too. She deserves a proper home." Rage surged within me. "You must be out of your damn minds if you think I'm letting her go anywhere with you," I spat. Nolan stepped forward menacingly. "I will be a part of my daughter's life, like it or not." "Over my dead body," I snarled. "Get out before I call the cops." Just then I heard the front door swing open again behind me. "I wouldn't unpack just yet if I were you," came Juliana's voice. I turned to see her waving a manila envelope, eyes flashing. Nolan paled at the sight of her. "In fact, I think you'll both be cleaning out your desks at the office instead," she continued. Cassidy let out a scoff. "And who the hell are you?" "Who I am doesn't matter. What matters is that I have enough evidence here of your sordid affair to bury you both." Juliana pulled out printed emails and photographed text conversations documenting their relationship, all time-stamped during my pregnancy. Nolan lunged for the papers, but Juliana yanked them away. "Ah, too late. Copies have already been sent to the head office. Hope you don't mind facing a sexual harassment investigation, Cassidy." Cassidy gasped, glanced frantically at Nolan, then fled for the still-open door. After a final venomous glare, Nolan followed close behind. I turned to Juliana, awestruck. "How did you get all that?" she winked. "I have my sources. No one messes with my best friend." Relief swept over me. Once again, Juliana had proven herself a loyal ally. While Nolan and his mistress reaped the bitter harvest of their lies, I would keep forging ahead. Upstairs, my innocent baby slept soundly, unaware of the darkness that had invaded our lives. Gazing at her sweet face, I knew I would move mountains to make sure she never suffered like I had. Nolan had slipped the knife in my back when I was vulnerable. Now it was my turn to take everything from him. His dignity, his career, his reputation. The only thought sweeter than revenge was the chance to start over, far from his shadow. The next morning, I received an urgent call from Juliana, instructing me to get to the office immediately. Still weak and sore, I reluctantly left my newborn with a neighbor and drove downtown. Juliana met me outside the towering glass building that housed our company's headquarters. "I hope you're ready for a show," she said with a sly grin. Up in the executive wing, we stepped into a posh waiting area outside the president's office. Cassidy was already there, pacing and biting her nails. When she saw me, her eyes flashed with hatred. At that moment, the office door swung open and Nolan stalked out, face pale. He froze when he saw us, fear creeping into his expression. Mr. Harlan, the company president, emerged behind Nolan and beckoned us all inside. "Please, have a seat," Harlan said politely as we filed in. He was known as much for his courtesy as his shrewd intelligence. Cassidy sat ramrod straight, eyes fixed on the floor. Nolan drummed his fingers anxiously on the armrest beside her. Harlan neatly arranged papers on his desk before folding his hands. It seems we have some personnel issues that require immediate attention. He turned to Cassidy first. You are aware that intimate relationships between employees are against company policy? Yes, sir, she answered tersely. And yet clear evidence shows you had an ongoing affair with a married executive, a man whose wife, I might add, you worked closely with during her difficult pregnancy. Cassidy flushed but said nothing. Harlan continued in measured tones. Your actions show a disturbing lack of integrity and professionalism. Effective today, your employment is terminated. Cassidy shot to her feet. You can't do this. My family donated half the artwork in this building. Harlan didn't blink. Your aunt may be a noted philanthropist, but neither she nor your family name will excuse misconduct here. Defeated, Cassidy grabbed her purse and fled the office. Nolan reached out as if to stop her, then seemed to think better of it. Harlan turned his attention next to Nolan. Not only did you violate company rules, you abandoned your family duties. Such poor character does not befit a senior executive. Nolan's face twisted. I've given 15 years to this firm. You can't throw me out over one mistake. It was no mere mistake. You systematically deceived your wife and jeopardized an important project, distracting your team for months. Your presence here is now untenable. Harlan slid an envelope across the desk. Here is the terms of your severance package. I suggest you accept and make a quiet departure. With shaking hands, Nolan took the papers and left. I watched him go with a sense of dark satisfaction. Harlan gave me a kind look. My dear, you were clearly the injured party here. Consider this matter closed on the company's end. I hope you recover fully, both physically and personally. Outside the office, Juliana hugged me tight. I let out a sob I didn't know I'd been holding in, the overwhelming emotions of the past weeks finally crashing over me. It was over. Justice had been swift and sure. Now I could focus on rebuilding a new life with my daughter, a peaceful life, far from the backstabbing duplicity of people like Nolan. When karma came for him, the knife in his back was one he richly deserved. In the weeks following Nolan's termination, I focused on regaining my strength and finding a new normal with my daughter. I took extended medical leave from work, relying on my savings while I figured out next steps. Juliana was a constant support, helping around the house and encouraging me to take it one day at a time. Forget about Nolan. Everything will work out, you'll see, she said during one late-night chat session. But I couldn't forget. Or forgive. Quiet rage still simmered within me over how Nolan deceived me. I replayed every memory, analyzing all the times he lied straight to my face. He had hurt me deeper than anyone ever had, and he deserved to fully reap what he sowed. Late one night, an idea began to take form. If Nolan thought he could simply walk away unscathed, he was dead wrong. With Juliana's help, I would make sure his betrayal followed him like a dark cloud over every aspect of his life. I decided to start with his beloved career reputation. Nolan had always taken pride in being a rising star at the company, ruthless and ambitious. It was time to crash his image and turn his coworkers against him. Juliana and I drafted an anonymous email detailing Nolan's affair with a direct report during my vulnerable pregnancy. We included key dates and events, along with Cassidy's name. From an internet cafe, we sent the message to everyone in their business circle. Soon after, the heated office gossip mill went into overdrive. Nolan's peers and colleagues were appalled at the sordid details. The portrait of a lying snake emerged, destroying any respect he once commanded. Meanwhile, I spoke with a take-no-prisoners divorce lawyer about destroying Nolan financially. We drew up divorce papers asserting adultery as grounds and seeking full custody with a generous side of child support. Serving Nolan the papers at his new apartment was profoundly satisfying. The look of defeat on his face was priceless. "You'll regret this," he snarled, but we both knew all the power rested firmly in my hands now. Getting my revenge on the home-wrecking Cassidy required a subtler approach. I unearthed her active social media accounts and anonymously sent screenshots to her college friends of her boasting about seducing a married man. The backlash was swift and severe. Calls for her to be fired from her new waitressing job flooded her online profiles. Old friends and roommates publicly denounced her character. She disappeared from social media entirely less than 24 hours later. While Cassidy retreated into obscurity, Nolan would soon endure the full public humiliation of a court battle dragging his name through the mud. I hoped the legal fees and child support bled him dry. As I rocked my baby to sleep each night, the dark thoughts receded and calm took its place. The storm Nolan brought into our lives had cleared. Soon we would be free of him for good. The memories of the loving man I once knew replaced by the far more accurate image of a spineless, cruel traitor. He was finally getting exactly what he deserved. The day of my first divorce hearing arrived gray and bleak, fittingly mirroring my mood. I dressed in sober black and steeled myself for the confrontation ahead. I strode into the courtroom with my head held high, refusing to show an ounce of weakness. Nolan sat at the defendant's table, looking pale and twitchy. His usual well-groomed appearance was notably absent. As we went through initial motions, Nolan tried repeatedly to catch my eye. I kept my gaze fixed straight ahead, acting as if he weren't even in the room. When the judge questioned Nolan about the affair accusations, he sputtered unconvincingly. It meant nothing, just a stupid mistake. My lawyer presented ironclad evidence of the timeline of his betrayal coinciding with my vulnerable pregnancy. Nolan had no counter-argument. On the custody issues, Nolan became agitated and confrontational. "You can't prove I wouldn't be a fit parent," he burst out. The judge's tone grew stern. "You have not participated in caring for your newborn child. These allegations against your character are troubling." In the end, the judge approved our proposed arrangements for full custody and a substantial monthly child support payment. Nolan had lost completely on all fronts. The burning fury in his eyes spoke volumes. As we left court, Nolan grabbed my arm and forced me to face him. "I won't let you take my daughter away from me," he hissed. I yanked my arm back. "Touch me again and I'll have my lawyer file for a restraining order." Leaving him fuming, I walked away feeling victorious. The law was firmly on my side. Over the next few weeks, Nolan maintained a campaign to salvage his reputation without success. He tried shifting blame, claiming I pushed him away during pregnancy and refused marital affection. But the facts of his prolonged deceit were indisputable. Former colleagues and business contacts continued to ice him out, disgusted by the very public details of his affairs and misconduct. Doors closed swiftly when he came calling for job prospects. Nolan grew increasingly unhinged, ranting on social media about injustice and karma coming for those who wronged him. But his credibility was shot. Few paid him any mind. Meanwhile, I embraced single motherhood with a new optimism. The final divorce decree arrived right before my daughter's first birthday, with all terms in my favor. The new year felt full of promise and possibility. On a whim, I reached out to my former workplace and discovered they had an opening, eager to have me return. The chance to fully rebuild my career after years on the mommy track felt like a hard-won victory. As I regained my financial independence and stability, I marveled at how far I'd come. Just a year ago, my world had come crashing down. Now the future looked bright through eyes unclouded by lies and betrayal. Nolan had gotten the bitter revenge he deserved, and I had reclaimed my life. Over the next year, I fell into a rhythm of balancing work and motherhood. My new role involved less travel, allowing me to better care for my daughter's needs. Having the flexibility to leave early for school pickups and doctor visits made all the difference. Settling into my own place also brought immense relief. The wounds of Nolan's betrayal no longer haunted every corner. This was a home filled with new memories and possibilities. My social life also revived as I reconnected with old friends. Juliana remained a stalwart support, helping wrangle my rambunctious toddler during girls' nights out. Her companionship brought much-needed fun and laughter into my days. Meanwhile, Nolan's circumstances continued to crumble. With his reputation in tatters, he could only find spotty contract work. He burned through his remaining savings trying to keep up appearances and pay owed debts. I heard through the grapevine that he was hitting the bottle pretty hard too, often drunk and belligerent in public. It seemed anyone still willing to associate with him was another cheating lowlife or enabler. On the rare occasions our paths crossed, Nolan's bloodshot eyes and disheveled appearance only emphasized how far he'd fallen. He was a shell of the polished, ruthless corporate climber I'd once known. "We could have had it all," he slurred to me on one awkward chance encounter outside my office building. "It wasn't meant to turn out like this." I sidestepped him with a shrug. Should have thought of that sooner. I had long since stopped caring about anything he had to say. After 2 years of sporadic calls and texts full of bitter recriminations, Nolan's contact gradually faded to nothing. The biggest surprise was realizing I didn't miss him in the slightest. I was finally free, fully healed from wounds that had once cut so deep. My daughter remained oblivious to her father's dysfunctional spiral into obscurity. To her, family meant me, Grandma, and Aunt Juliana. She was thriving in preschool and had playdates most weekends with classmates. I made sure her life was filled with love and joy. As for Cassidy, the homewrecker who helped implode my marriage, karma had left its mark on her, too. Crippled by the scandal and social media backlash, she had changed her name and left the state. Wherever she ended up, I hope guilt haunts her over what she helped destroy. Maybe Nolan can give her late-night calls instead. On the eve of my daughter's 4th birthday, I hosted a princess tea party with 10 giggling little girls crowding my living room. As I snapped photos and filled teacups, my heart swelled with love and pride. The painful past felt like a distant lifetime ago. Now my days were rich with playfulness and possibility, chasing around a bright-eyed daughter who was the center of my world. I had traveled through the darkness and come out wiser, stronger, renewed in body and spirit. The future awaited, more radiant than ever. Time marched steadily onward, each new day further distance between my present happiness and the pain of the past. My daughter thrived in elementary school, smart and social. She excelled in reading and loved showing off new dance moves she learned in hip-hop class. Her eyes, so like her father's, now sparkled with joy he had long forfeited the right to witness. At my company, years of consistently superb work paid off with a promotion to a director-level position. I now led a team of bright up-and-comers helping set strategy for our division. It felt surreal to be so highly valued when just a few years prior I'd wondered if my career would fully recover post-divorce. On evenings when my schedule allowed, Juliana and I would meet up for dinner and dissect dating app horror stories. We made an unlikely pair, her flashy and fiery, me understated and dry-humored. But our sisterly bond ran deep. "You really showed that cheating scumbag Nolan what's what," Juliana remarked one night as we lingered over tiramisu. Not every woman could turn heartbreak into such epic revenge. I smiled wryly. Don't think I didn't imagine slipping arsenic in his wine a few times. But in the end, living well turned out to be the best revenge. One spring morning I spotted a familiar name in the newspaper and my heartbeat quickened reflexively before I could stop it. There was Nolan, looking worn and shabby as he exited a courthouse trying unsuccessfully to dodge photographers. The accompanying article chronicled his guilty plea to drunk driving charges after ramming his car into a tree. His license suspended, career in tatters. The shell of the man I once loved now seemed utterly broken. For the first time in ages, an unexpected pang of sympathy pierced my heart. Whatever latent feelings stirred were quickly extinguished when Nolan's name surfaced again the following week. Arrested on assault charges after a bar fight, his spiral into reckless self-destruction seemed complete. I shook my head, sadly but resolutely. Some people could not be saved from themselves. I had to remain focused on protecting the family we had built, me and our daughter. She was the only part of him worth cherishing. As I helped my little girl practice newly learned multiplication tables that evening, I marveled at how innocence persists even when surrounded by the fallen world. Her childhood was so different from my own, devoid of yelling, mind games, and violence. By some miracle I had overcome my beginnings and broken the cycle. My daughter would grow up trusting in steadfast love, not tiptoeing around landmines. I realized then that I bore no lingering resentments over the pain and deception in my past. Survival and renewal had given me the courage to fully embrace life's complexities. On the other side awaited joy and light, if you just kept moving forward. Nolan's wasted potential was not my concern. His choices led him down a destructive road long before our paths fatefully intertwined. I saw that now with clarity. My task was to raise my daughter with wisdom and compassion, equipping her for whatever lay ahead. As for me, the possibilities of the future beckoned brightly once more. Scars healed and lessons learned, I stepped forward to greet them.
Robert felt like he was being conned. She blurted a nasty demand for $85,000 in gift form, showing her hand and becoming raw emotion from Sarah. Returning home with such unmitigated gall, months after absolutely shattering my life by running away with my fiancé, was enough reason for me not to forgive her immediately, even if she is bearing new fruit. My father, as did I with the migrants at Our Lady of Perpetual Challenges, a story for another time, told her to get out in that deep voice of his, pointing out she was mistaken if expecting a welcome mat laid out 11th hour, and all of a sudden seemingly traumatic home birth plan. As aggressive as Sarah could be, she did not come with the realization that when she returned no one would welcome her home, and neither was gone as well. My name is Caroline Judy. I am 28 and soon to be Dennis. A year before my wedding, a group of those friends had heaved an audible sigh. Thank God, girl. It was starting to be BNI Hannah up in this camp. Put me at a social event they can support, even though I thought it was none of their business. Because of the way I look, there are things that have always been sure when it comes to physical attributes. I had room for doubt in me since childhood that anyone could ever find me attractive. At that meeting, I met Dennis, fateful. The king of red cups, Dennis walked right up to little old me. Even his simple greetings had my heart racing. He appreciated the accompanying elbow grease and made my bookish, less exuberant history seem worthwhile. I was calm, whereas Dennis is high maintenance. Guess what was so shocking about that? He became my first official boyfriend. Life became enjoyable and fun, with simple things now, including shared joy in movies and dinners, etc. 1 year later, he proposed, and we started to plan our wedding. The relationship flourished, even with his friendly demeanor and dashing good looks that I had felt were entirely too beyond me. When I introduced Dennis to my parents, my mother squealed in delight. Not at the sight of her only son having apparently found happiness with a nice young man. Rather, she asked, once Deanne was out of earshot, why on earth could he ever fancy someone so ugly? It was embarrassing how surprised she had been that I could get a guy as handsome as Dennis to like me. To which she retorted, quite naturally now you can even jocular type. But it perturbed my father and simply told her to never say things like that. One of those being that my mother once insulted me about my appearance, her home remedies and suggestions on which parts she thought needed fixing through plastic surgery zapped on the confidence I have in myself. Sarah, my older sister, who is beautiful besides, has been the family's admiration, and any small compliment that was ever paid to me paled in comparison. Throughout the marriage introduction, I was praying for true support from my family. But instead, what I kept getting eventually were unnecessary words of undermining both time and again. And Sarah waltzed in and changed everything. Dennis was smitten by her beauty and charm. Their crowding out of Sarah and my journey home with Dennis's endless accolades tossed me to the side. Sarah's unrepentant and pregnant reappearance, along with her inconvenient request of a grand gift, breaks the intricate balance in family relations. Unfortunately, such a cavalier avoidance of the fallout from her actions illuminates how challenging it is to forgive and be forgiven by other members in your clan when you have broken faith with them. Through all this struggle, my journey to self-acceptance and love, in the midst of insecurities and others defining me, has paved a path that continues to defy the odds even after nearly 2 years later. But throughout the book, there is no question that Dennis admired Carolyn's family, even when he was mildly shocked at finding out her father had saved $85,000 for their wedding. He was far too excited to care that they were, in their own way, beautiful people who had been nothing but kind and generous towards him. And besides, how great would it be? A beautiful sister or a dad with things. Carolyn liked his light-hearted manner, which was a good counterpoint to her own worrying ways. But what a difference another week made for Dennis. He said it casually, and with the lack of muscle, you might hear someone talking about a slight chance for rain. Let's just call this off. Carolyn was all smiles from confusion, at first not understanding the weight of his words. There were no soft feelings on Dennis's side. He told her out of the blue that he'd never really loved until loving Becky, and then left as abruptly as she had come into his life. He confessed to fantasizing about the perks of being with Carolyn, but shirked from having an eternity shackled platonically to someone he felt no physical affection towards, which is why he chose Sarah instead. Carolyn went from already having no self-esteem to hearing the nail in her coffin, aka Richard. The 12-turning 13-year-old Sarah, who was ecstatic to be engaged to Dennis, and the family's aftermath, added something like salt into a wound. As if it did, Sarah's mother hosted a lavish feast in celebration of her daughter and future son-in-law getting married, all the while blind to Carolyn's hurt. Her father, though, was visibly shocked and disappointed, his movements betraying a kind of sorrow that seemed new to the both of them. With Sarah cruelly taunting their father, the family situation broke completely and ended in such ugly confrontation, where he drove her mother away calling after them, that he could no longer bear to witness more of his very own blood being abused by daughter. At the time, Carolyn's father was too emotional to properly respond, but after he got calmer apologized and alluded that there is a much deeper truth. Carolyn, Dennis, and Sarah, this is a look at how betrayal and family patterns can obscure who we are when caught in the trauma created by loved ones. Featuring a sister who takes full advantage of Carolyn's heartache and embarrassment, the novel delves into how we can grow from finding compassion in some seriously devastating life scenarios. I searched for power and approval, assured it was a good thing that everything crumbled before the first step down to my husband. If a man like Dennis could betray me the way he had, I figured that was just one tick of infidelity down, and many more to go. I tried to be brave, but my tears came anyway. My dad reassured me of his love, squeezing my hand tightly and giving me the moment to let it all out. Sarah and Dennis, long ago stories to be concluded, so that their lives went on without me, were followed by a hug from him after this painful chapter instead of the other way around. The parting was a small consolation given the emotional devastation it left in its wake. As time passed and I went farther away, the edge of this wound dulled a bit each day as my life took one small step after another towards normality. It's been a year now since all this craziness went down, and the wound of betrayal has healed with time to where I am starting to mend my relationship again with my family, particularly through his, Dad's, support. While I was visiting home, this opinion manifested in me deciding to cook pork belly for my father as a token of goodwill and time together. But then a disturbance broke our calmness. Then the door opened, and Bibi Titang Yen, Sarah and Dennis. My father echoed my shock, and his previous order for Sarah to remain away had seemingly slipped from his memory. In Sarah's voice, releasing the drama of old injuries and telling about her application to become a mother was plainly calculated in my mom thinking March would cover September. The demand that followed the gift of $85,000 was delusional at best and showed her intentions had not changed one bit. I did my best to keep it together as they reveled in their insensitivity and laughed at me for crying. That jaw-clenching, frustrated new response was the punishing realization of how fucking far we still have to go emotionally when those bitches laugh at me. This was the fight that I had fought. There was more than just reopening old wounds. There was my resistance in the balance. It was a clear sign, if any more were needed, that she has not altered in the slightest and will always put material gain over real reconciliation when Sarah tried to cash in on her pregnancy. Then my father and I stood unswayed against her machination that was a step upward in the healing, an assertion of our respect when disrespected. Healing from betrayal is a long and arduous process with just as many setbacks, but it also provides chances for growth, self-expansion, and the confirmation of one's own personal truth. It was a sobering experience for me as the sting of those barbs lingered. Dennis said something derogatory about anger, only making me look uglier, which was meant to hurt but served merely as a stark reminder of how shallow their assessment ever was. Criticizing me further, as my dad and I stayed silent, that was Sarah revealing herself. It just wasn't a good thing to see their laughter not full of real blessings around me. Next family battle up the ante. Sarah declares she will go back for her birth, completely oblivious, as we all were, to the tectonic plate changes happening within our home's lexicography, with a casual but disingenuous-sounding inquiry as to where our mother was, revealing she was not updated on the most recent familial explosion. Sarah was surprised to learn that our mother had been told to leave, a result of her favoritism towards Sarah and the resulting conflict. One also which Sarah found it hard to appreciate, said she had suggested at the time of our parents' divorce, of which turmoil in her own life was a cause infrequently dwelt on by Cully and Kavda, that no more proofs were needed. Even after the divorce, Sarah did not lose her self-centeredness. She was looking forward to returning to a support system that did not exist, showing just how out of touch with reality she truly is in the gravity of her actions and what they have cost our family. The notion that she could have her old life back, bearing in mind the immense changes done to it, a statement of denial and selfishness. The loss of all the things that had kept our house warm with a motherly embrace turned what was already an unconventional family landscape into some tundra. The lack of preparation that Sarah had for motherhood was emphasized by her shock upon realizing she would be raising the child to whom she just gave birth. Her complaint about all the work of being a mother was at odds with her goal for glamour. Her response to facing the world of our parents being divorced, and also her part in their divorce proceedings, was instead more imposition upon my father, wanting him to do what she should have availed a lifetime. And her apology to me, despite its facade of sweet make amends, came off as hollow and half-hearted, a final plot for a bit more empathy. Although this should have always been the case, my father told Sarah that night to get lost, and I think from there it became a real turnaround. When he did not yield to her requests, he was setting a firm boundary that their relationship can no longer be about manipulation. When he declared Sarah would no longer be spoken of as his daughter, that hurt because finally it was something concrete for which she had to account, if only in her own mind. This challenging transaction, as stressful and anguished it was to experience, opened the doors of great clarity. It sent the message that respect and responsibility, as well cause and effect, are not topics to be trifled with. They burrow deep into one another's selfishness and hang on presence forever in a family. Before we could learn to progress moving forward from the shadows of our past, healing and understanding would be a long, arduous path. With a mix of horror and understanding, I saw just how distant we had become. You have no right to my care. We're not family. Strangers, my dad said, slicing open the air with his words. Sarah, in shock and feeling betrayed by how thin familial relationships can be when she then finds out a fact of our family unit that has just devastated her perception. We were not related by blood. Dad told me that Sarah had been born from our mom in another marriage of hers before they got married, and I was obviously expecting. This realization also explained the special treatment our mom gave Sarah, maybe to save her from leaving us. But Dad's love for us never faltered, solidifying my role in his heart, no matter the biology. Sarah was staggered and in shock for the first time ever, now knowing she had no biological link with her dad. The girl had always grown up believing they were related by blood, and all of it was now thrown out the window. She reacted in shock and said that she was actually relieved, in an even more twisted manner of speech, painting the father as having such bad genes to which dodging a bullet only made sense. Her plan of trying to capitalize on the situation monetarily and telling us she needs that $85,000 we would have spent for my wedding left me just saying, "I'm sorry pushing you around when your baby is not like pushing a box." Realizing he viewed her as a stranger, Dad stood steadfast in his resolve not to provide any financial support and told Mary she would need ask her mom for help. Dad was unmoved by Dennis's interjection, calling on the father to come help his son. The act was an emphatic rejection not only of Sarah, but also the duties rented by a dead marriage. Sarah's final words were emboldened with bitterness and hatred, painting Dad as the villain she had always envisioned him as. But Dad's explanation revealed a deeper manipulation. Learning that conflicts with the bio father she wanted to disappear as soon as he was replaced by our dad had led Mom into sabotaging her legal adoption of Sarah, placing a financial. Before getting closure on old issues adds a layer of complexity to whatever predicated familial dishonesty. While we were ascertaining these unpleasant truths, it allowed us to observe the complex network of relationships and intentions that had characterized our family. It drove home the notion that familial ties constructed on openness and genuine affection have greater resilience to life's blows, whereas those built on dishonesty and self-interest ultimately corrode, a series of hurt feelings left in their wake. After our parents got remarried, Mom opted to keep her maiden name. The only reason I can figure is it might have been another way for her, and the marriage itself would not be known by Sarah or anyone else on earth. So Dad said that with a tone of disgust, which sort of means either he feels very strongly about it or there is something more than what we see on the surface. The child support money was wasted on Mom's excessive spending and did not benefit Sarah. This only served to widen the gap between Dad and Sarah. It just proved why he also thought she had no right to expect any financial support from him following their divorce. Her demands were like extortion. To Sarah, our father being not supportive was a cold shock, and she noticed the disappointment of her confidence. Dad was cold, she tried to convey with the help of a few responses from me about it. However, we were always reminded that my mother is really heartless. The unexpected arrival at Sarah's parents for her birthing cross-examined my theory. The awareness that she could not trust in reaching out to Mother, and it was very obvious. Accompanied by a simile, my mom would be here when I get home with open arms, only helped me to see how wrongly entitled one is regarding enduring support before gasping over possible abandonment. The truth of the unfolding situation shattered Sarah's belief in our mom loving her no matter what. Her running off to elope with Dennis caused the family schism, which ultimately defined a crack deeper and broader than our parents' divorce or Mom's departure, along with much-needed money meant for Sarah. This fact of deception was made even worse by the knowledge that Sarah had been lied to twice. First about the divorce, and then regarding what happened to all of Mom's money. Confronted with the brutal reality, Sarah became frustrated and desperate for her share of our savings, a plea that I harshly delivered against. You have to ask Mom. I felt Sarah's pain as she battled to try and take it all in, her fear mounting up more when it came down to turning to Dennis for help only he was being Dutchy about everything. Dennis' limp lack of comfort or useful response to Sarah only underscored his own mercenary approach and the fundamental failure on which her long-standing dependency was based. The cry she let out when abandoned in agony became a message of hopelessness, unrecognizable against the stirrings from before for money to help her family and make peace with them. For Sarah, the altercation ended with her leaving, but for us, it was far from over. Then, like a dagger in the heart grabber, Sarah offered to wipe us from her memory. A thing indicating profile removed a crazy act showing how torn apart she was and illustrating just how estranged we had become. As shocking as it seemed, this threat was apparently the cumulative effect of all these revelations and the emotional fallout from years of misunderstandings and manipulations within our family. One night, I was woken by a mass phone call to see that they had finally cut my daughter from the mangled wreckage hours later. Groggy, I replied without totally realizing what was going on, and suddenly there I was watching a live stream. When I saw flames brushing the mouth of our family home, my heart momentarily stopped. The potted plants ablaze, the fire, small at first, looked as though it might consume everything if fueled by a gust of wind. Dennis's face appeared, his voice ominously calm when he asked if maybe I had accidentally left something on, prompting for someone to report me, before revealing that no, it was him who set the fire with a plan apparently designed to scare out of $85K birthday funds, which will be meant as payment toward my wedding. His response was to threaten me that if I did not go and get him the money for putting out his fire, he would blackmail me with this falsehood, just as low a way of getting at money as avoiding payment. I declined, using the words "their mistake." There shouldn't have been anyone there they would not want to disturb Dad since he came out and stayed with me so that they could avoid any potential harassment. Ultimately, their plan was based on a set of false premises, which makes it more irresponsible and unjustifiable. Like we said, things went from 0 to 100 real quick. We turned to see, to our horror, my mother emerging from the burning home with them. She had been an accidental victim of their reckless stunt. No, instead, Sarah's first response after the initial alarm had faded into steamy silence was to request her money so she would not have lost anything, as Mom fell and stammered incoherent from a burn. Fortunately, emergency services arrived in time to put an end to this nightmare scenario. Arrested for arson and exposed as duplicitous buffoons, Sarah the Beard Bandit was revealed. What presumably began as a poorly executed extortion plan wound up in rescheduling fucking mutilation. From behind the bars, they woke up to find themselves facing their actions in reality. A terrible reminder of where reckless ends and criminality begins. Sarah's ensuing arrest and the baby she bore in jail resulted in her ultimately giving up that child, putting a defenseless little one into unfamiliar hands for their own good, to be kept separate from the darkness. The child would have the opportunity for a new beginning, one that could be filled with security and love through foster or adoptive parents. On the other end of that gamut, my mother's body bore physical scars. Sarah and Dennis had not sustained any wounds except to their reputation. It was a tragic moment in the demise of what had once been family, driven to destruction for, mostly wrong practices. We were fragmented and broken afterward, a family that would never be the same again for decades to come. One day she came to know that Dad was no longer selling our old family home, and the next thing, Mom started going in behind his back, trying to steal valuables. She had decided that she would come to live in this house when it appeared unoccupied. Though I remembered how beautiful my mother once was, like Sarah, she had long since stopped becoming a sympathetic figure to me. This was a woman who had betrayed both Sarah and me past the point of my being able to mourn for her, and now she again behaved in an entitled manner while illegally trespassing. Broke up with herself onto our territory, asking that my father assume all responsibility over whatever injuries ensued. Daddy vehemently denied these accusations of her and said that it was illegal for you to trespass and steal. Her defense of the situation and her now married beauty did nothing to diminish my father's position. He maintained that she deserved whatever punishment was appropriate, but not for this. Afterward, while the house did have some minor damage, it was not impossible to live in. We decided to let it go. My father took early retirement, bought a cute little house near the ocean, and I made the otherwise smart decision to move in with him so that we could both work remotely in silence. Our new eco-home had huge windows offering amazing sunsets over the ocean. More surprising were the simple pleasures found in trading city life for rural tranquility. Watching local wildlife wherever we turned, which gave most days an air of adventure. Country living had no shortage of natural encounters, but I met new people too, pushing me towards a gentle giant whose easygoing attitude made him an unlikely target. We were on a peaceful, joyful new page of life with visions to garden together, and my father's choice of wine for our evenings. The loving and kind words from Father were certainly a departure of old, but they also served as balm on some once broken flesh scars that had helped reshape how I viewed me. I fantasized about wearing a princess gown. Something that seemed so impossible was now not only possible but encouraged by my loving father. I giggled, enjoying his good-natured tease, and how our lives had changed for the better. With the nature, fresh starts and solitude provided by rural living, we found peace in the nothingness of what to expect. Ultimately, we laughed all day long and loved in that giddy way you do when there is nothing left to lose. And for us, this translated into, other than not having much else going on externally, here I sit a damaged man. Somehow we were still engaged with one another. This wedding saw a situation develop that I could hardly credit. My in-laws, some hint of their own, had even become the object of a certain amount of underhand, baseless talk among my guests. To my shock, they then loudly burst out, "So now you're married. Now that you want to become a true member of our new family, aren't you going to have to earn the money and work with goals?" They demanded that I give them an additional $5,000 a month, dubbing what had been uttered by my father-in-law. The room grew strangely silent, and I was left speechless at their insolence, feeling my own face turn white with shock. Lucky for me, my father then came up to the microphone. His firm words made the situation a relief apart from that one anxious moment. "My name is Betty Rachel, now 33 years old. My boyfriend, we call him Steph for short, is a 35-year-old that I met through friends anxious about how long I have been single. After my mother died young, my father took on the dual role of both parents. His faith in providing for me was so real. This loss so very much hurt me that I stopped showing my feelings, and very rarely had a source close romantic relationship. Even though Stephen was the kind of person you can rely on to get things done, and take the blame if nobody else does, he is always a gentleman. Then a tree fell on me and caused me to wake up. His constant support and kindness enabled me to soften up. To make him more special, mine was my happiness when I woke up in the morning. He is a tall 35 years old, and I am 33. So when he proposed, it felt like moving from one natural stage to another. Stephen had always been a kind and thoughtful man. He was there to give me support and encouragement when I needed it most, saying, "Don't worry. Believe in me, and if something makes you feel uncomfortable, then wouldn't it be enough for me to be there with kindness till you get well? Betty, I love you. Just count upon me." It was thanks to these promises that he would give me the pleasant emotion of being happy that warmed my heart with the both enveloping, kindly radiance of his words over mine. I wanted him to have this all too. When I told my father the good news, the first thing he did was cry. "Wow, Betty, now after all these years you're finally getting married." "I'm so happy for you," he said. I teased him about being sentimental, and we had a heart-to-heart conversation which finally revealed a deep-seated fear within him. What if I never found a husband? It was a moving moment that demonstrated how much he cared. I thanked my dad with the utmost sincerity, as a person who grew up with him alone. Now we know that their wedding will be a day taxing for both of us emotionally, probably with, given my inherent nature to weep. Stephen's even wore tears. Stephen and I were too busy. In addition to steering our wedding preparations, we tried to fit every work commitment we had into our free hours, even going on a tight 3-week tour of Northeast China and being there for a business dinner every night. It was exhausting, but we kept our spirits up. There was a special moment on the horizon, meeting Stephen's parents for the first time. Having met my father not long after he proposed, Stephen arranged for me to meet his parents at last. Scheduling conflicts and all that sort of thing later, which delayed this long-awaited introduction to be sure. Anyway, a trip was planned. As we walked toward his parents' house, I felt a surge of nervousness, but Stephen was fast to comfort me. "Don't be uneasy. My parents are really good people," he said, reassuring me and helping to settle my anxieties. For this was the start of a significant new stage in our life together. When I rang the doorbell of Stephen's family home, it was his mother who answered. "Mom, I'm back," he greeted her cheerfully, receiving a warm smile in return. "Have you really come home?" "Stephen, that makes me so happy," she rejoiced. As her son amiably engaged her in friendly banter, I introduced myself courteously. "It's good to meet you. My name is Betty, and I'm Stephen's fiancée." She mildly changed her tone with me, lowering the volume from the voice that spoke with cheerfulness to Stephen and dropping her smile. "Oh, you're Betty," she noted, giving me a thorough going-over that felt closer to judgment than greeting. She then led us into the parlor, where she continued to put on airs. "Betty, I would like to know what you have to offer. Stephen is our treasure and only child. If you are to marry him, you must be a fitting wife. Are you worthy?" she demanded, her voice sharp, making the question an interrogation. I had never expected that kind of hostile, bitter feeling from my future mother-in-law and couldn't find a reply. "You will join us," she told me. "Are you ready for it?" The press questioned the tone of her words. I wasn't married into any royal or renowned family after all. Did I owe such a great commitment just because I was marrying her son? I reflected on my answer, trying to think of something to say. But she would have none of my silence and exclaimed impatiently, "When I ask you a question, answer at once. You are so ungracious." Her voice developed in intensity, demanding an immediate response. Despite feeling numbed, I mustered, "I hope that Stephen and I can assist one another through our marriage." But this was still no good. "That's a knave thing to say," she replied. "You are not just going along with one another. Taking care of Stephen is your job as a wife. In this case, his very life is dependent on you," she criticized cruelly. It was at this moment that Stephen's father, who had been quietly watching the exchange, stepped in. "Come on, dear," he said in mild remonstrance. Turning to me, he apologized. "Sorry about that, Betty. You must have been completely taken aback by what my wife just said, in an attempt to balance things with a stolid countenance." As I fought to keep my cool, I reminded myself that Stephen's mother was fiercely protective of him. It was very likely just her testiness speaking out of turn in that case. Just at that moment, Steve's brother came into the room. He showed no emotion on his face as he moved. The mere sight of him calmed everyone. It was a brief respite. However, this calm vanished again when he, with a disarming smile, sided with what his mother had just said. "What my wife said is true. Yet most of all, what is worrying is that you are from a single-parent family," he stated. "Why?" I was perplexed. "A single parent doesn't have a good public image. Aren't we justified in saying that she, Someone with such a background shouldn't be the wife of our only son. He said, "Hold on a minute." I interrupted, unable to let his words go unchallenged. What's wrong with being raised by one parent? My father struggled very hard to raise me by himself. I have always been very thankful for my roots and proud of my father. Just because I was raised by one parent does not make me any less valuable. They persisted in their argument. Because you were missing one parent, you couldn't have learned how to be a good wife, do housework, etc., they said. I helped my father with lots of housework anyway. And I'm also pretty good at cooking. So please don't say that. Although I rebutted firmly, Stephen's mother disregarded my words and finished. I can agree to your marrying Stephen, but you must agree in turn to give us everything because we are Stephen's parents. Can you promise that? Her request stunned me. From a position close to his mother asked aloud, "Here, since you came all the way here to request a marriage with a fine gentleman of our family, you surely know what should be done." Upon making me explain further, he cut in to make things clear that your future in-laws dominated the hours of conversation and left little room for my own point of view. I went over this conversation in my mind and came to realize the extent to which it had really bothered me that night. The evening had brought about thoughts of anxiety for our future family history, thoughts I had avoided up until now. Feeling weighed down by our recent visit to see Stephen's parents, I felt it was important to discuss my concerns with him. "Stephen, do your parents always treat guests like what I encountered today?" I queried, half hoping for some moral support. The question had no effect on Stephen's small smile. "What's that got to do with it?" he asked in confusion, struggling to convey my meaning. "Well, the way your parents spoke to me and the words they spoke," I said. "Oh, really? They were just discussing," he answered in a way that seemed indifferent. I understood that Stephen's parents were caring for their son's future, but I thought their conduct excessive. I know your parents worry so much," I told him in mild protest, "but they really care too much." "Really? Why?" he asked. What they said was right. His voice was as if he almost said. "Besides, they're arranging for us to get married now, so forget it altogether." What he said made me worry about it more. He just seemed more in line with what his parents thought than with recognizing my feelings. Stephen sensed this and took me in his arms. "Betty, you have no need to worry like this." Then with his words, he seemed not completely to get my point. "The folks are a little upset, that's all. It's their only son getting married. It's going to be all right. You don't have to think about every detail. I reckon they just want us to be together, as they are." "That's why they were a bit fierce," he added. "Oh," I replied doubtfully. Stephen seemed to feel it was only fair that his parents should demand so much of him, but I couldn't help thinking this wasn't right for him to look down on me just because I'd been brought up by a single parent. I didn't think that anyone who held such views really deserved to be close partners with us. It is our wedding, and we ourselves must be the central figures. How they give or withhold their consent really has nothing to do with it. Even though I was still upset, unfortunately my head couldn't be beaten. Ruminating over his parents' opinion then seemed unavailing. Finally, I believe that one of the happiest days in life is a wedding day. Our relatives, friends, colleagues, and even bosses filled the venue. Walking down the aisle with my father, who has cared for me lovingly, I felt all kinds of emotions. Stephen and I spoke our vows and agreed to give a ring. The whole room then burst into applause. Despite hardship, this was our way, our only road, and I resolutely, yet gently, steered myself toward the world outside. When Stephen and I walked down the aisle together as a couple, the full realization that I was actually marrying him for real penetrated me, joy flooding through my entire being. As we entered the venue, the festival and video plays of our life together gave a human touch to celebration. It was indeed a memorable time, because they greeted friends who I have failed to meet for a long time, and congratulations filled the space with heartfelt joy. Although there remained some doubts in my heart about Stephen's parents, I felt so relieved, and quite honestly happy I had married him. After the ceremony, we planned to register our marriage officially. At that moment, we would live together as husband and wife. In the happiness of that day, I enjoyed every minute. But as the celebration proceeded, and it was time to begin greeting guests in earnest, an odd feeling stole over me. Stephen's parents with us in line looked anything but stable on their feet and had deep red faces, obvious signs that they had drunk too much. A few relatives quietly asked if they were all right. It was rather embarrassing, but we had to get on with the ceremony's ending. Just as the microphone was handed to us, Stephen's mother suddenly grabbed my hand and dragged me from Stephen. She then shouted at me with such force that all her words seemed to drop like heavy stones. "Listen here, Betty. After this wedding, you're going to be giving yourself to us in full. Get ready because we are going to give you hell." There were sounds of conversation among the guests, and some of them laughed, thinking this was a joke. So with the situation growing worse, Stephen's father seized the microphone and scolded my dress. "Betty, how can you put on such a dress? It doesn't suit you at all, dear." Always the traditionalist, his mother readily chimed in her assent. The whispering among guests grew louder, with more shades of concern. I turned to Stephen, my eyes a mixture of disbelief and pleading, hoping that he might step in and prevent his father's impolite interruptions. This situation demanded that even if only for me alone, he had to stand up and defend the dignity of our union. In the midst of our wedding reception, a certain moment exposed the linkages within my new family. Stephen's parents, already quite drunk, started to make demands on me. If I wanted truly to merge into their family, they said, "How can you prove belonging? After you get married, you have to give us a few thousand every month and all your bonuses." I was shocked by their greed, I heard myself saying. We interrupting parents with parents continued to lay responsibility for me that exhausted to memorize my artisan bunker hour ago. My father, seeing my predicament, grabbed the microphone back from them, and then firmly but respectfully said, "Kind of. Stop it, both of you. Do you think showing no shame, and despite his unassuming style my father, Stephen's parents still, it would be offensive from them, won't let up see that single parents come to nothing. He made them for just about many days." Their bold rebukes cut me deeply thief, but father was unaffected in his response. "You people are something worse yet. And you did not go along with Li Cheng because he is a single father." Then he added a twist that changed the entire tone of this present exchange. "I never thought that people like you would work for President Roy. President Roy is a man with a good reputation, so I assumed his subordinates must be worthy of some respect." The reference to President Roy hit home for my father-in-law, whose company was a client of my father's, and who counted President Roy as an old friend. After all presidents out of wedlock, and how many single parents can you say something like your children were raised up? He continued then, and seeing the summit in its glory, added even higher to its pinnacle. As my father-in-law watched the horrified faces of his relatives, the room suddenly changed dynamics. No longer were they tall and confident. My father was standing up there on the platform next to the microphone, now looking small and scared. "I am sorry, sir. Please don't tell this incident to President Roy," he begged pleadingly, now collapsing at a 180-degree change on his knees from where he had previously proclaimed his loyalty to President Roy and fallen over prone on the ground like an overripe melon at just the slightest touch. This point was a turning point for me, revealing both the true nature of Stephen's family and resilience, with connections vested in my own roots. This awareness was most painful and yet needed as I considered our future in the midst of conversations among all our friends throughout the humming hall. Objection to my plan of action thus, the atmosphere was overpowered by a sense of failure expressed in Stephen's body language. Thus caught between curiosity and enjoyment, they began to record what was happening right in front of them. Father stood stoically by my side, unyielding. No matter how much you apologize, you cannot take back their words. Your father asked if I wanted to go over there with him, and without looking back, I followed into the distance. I never saw it again. Measures stopped taking the mic from Stephen. I stood up there on stage with all my authority, a reckless renegade who had grabbed control 3 minutes previously. Thank you for the great entertainment, but there will be no marriage. I concluded my words with resolve, fixing them first on Stephen, then his parents, and finally everybody present. I shall also make sure to return all the gifts and contributions you made to get me here, with acknowledgement. Having made these pronouncements, I took my leave at the same time that Father did. In front of me as I left, Stephen had his parents with him. They wore an expression somewhere between frightened and broken-hearted. Behind, as in every other such case, both the people he knew and people he recognized gathered round to form groups where they anxiously talked in low voices. After a few days, my decision was to return the money and gifts. I explained this to the few guests who had seen me do it, and they all took sides. The decision was courageous. They praised both my father and me for our honesty or even leadership in confronting such a difficult problem. Soon after the wedding glow spread into every corner of society, his colleagues naturally talked about the event, thereby casting he and his kin were thrown in an unfavorable light. Not only did this gossip ruin Stephen's reputation, but it also left him with no one to turn to, cast as a man without character by his own people, only embarrassed and unable to show his face to any at work. Stephen resigned from the company. His father also felt the repercussions of the incident. When the basis of the case had been discovered through grapevine news within the company, you made a strong response. Stephen's father was demoted and transferred to a very remote branch of the company, a clear downshift that fully expressed the company's attitude on integrity and respect. As for Stephen's family, their actions at the wedding caused them to become more and more isolated from their community and extended family. Although this was all regrettable, it was of their own direct making, a clear reminder that actions do have consequences, and sometimes those results can be very hard to foresee. But in the meantime, life goes on with lessons learned. Someday Sidima shall embark upon life anew. Since the dramatic termination of my planned wedding, it is at this time that I have used to create a closer relationship with my parents. We have spent increasing quantities of quality time together, and has enhanced my feeling for everything they have done for me. From out of the blue, one day he started a deep conversation that forced me to think. "Betty, are you willing to take over my business?" he asked, with hope and a hint of earnestness mingling in his eyes. "When he was taking me in that direction, did you refer to, 'Why don't you aim high and become president of my company?'" The suggestion was a step forward that seemed, however, reassuring in his mind. "I'll do my best," I replied to him with a jumble of excitement and nervousness swirling inside of me. From that moment on, I resolved to concentrate on advancing my career and put that part of my personal life aside for the time being. I wanted to show myself and my father that I could achieve, and perhaps one day be the same kind of successful leader as he is. Right now, I've thrown myself wholeheartedly into my father's company. A business is giving and worthwhile, though it presents frequent challenges. I will definitely seize the chance to do this kind of work. But thinking back on the wedding disaster, it is clear that Stephen's in-laws were not to be unreasoned with. Some people should have made stupid people their hobby and left conducting the ceremony for couples alone. Fortunately, as the marriage was ultimately never officially registered, I got through a legally binding mistake. Now, without any family commitments of marriage and in-law complications to complicate matters, free to pursue my goal of getting ahead in life. It's liberating to think that from all that mess I have come up with a clear plan for my future. I eagerly await the possibilities that leading the company holds out. I wish myself all the best and hope that there is something valuable here for anyone who hears it. Thanks for sticking with me. And if you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to my free blog. My next video will be up soon, and you know I look forward to sharing updates and thoughts with you there. Simon's harsh words cut deep as he cruelly dismissed his son's worth, even as the child battled illness with resilience. Rachel, standing beside him, callously laughed at the scene. Witnessing their heartlessness, I made a firm decision to sever ties with them for good. If you both feel that way, that is his grandmother, I will adopt him, I declared firmly. Go ahead, Rachel retorted dismissively. It's not like he has much time left anyway. Just don't come to us begging for money when it's time for his funeral, all right? She chuckled loudly, her words devoid of compassion. Those heartless words stoked a fire of anger within me. From now on, we are strangers. Do not contact me again. Understood. Goodbye, I said with finality. I had received crucial information about my grandson Maxim's condition from the doctor, yet I chose to cut ties without informing Simon and Rachel. When they eventually learn the truth, I am certain they will rue their callous actions. As I held Maxim close, I knew they would come to regret their behavior deeply. My name is Emily. I'm 63 years old and a housewife. My husband passed away 7 years ago, and now I live alone. It was lonely at first, but I've gotten used to it. With my husband's inheritance, my retirement fund, and my pension, I can live a comfortable and peaceful life. I have a son named Simon. He's 33 and still hasn't settled down, even though he's at the ideal age for marriage. He doesn't have a steady job and lives a carefree life. After graduating from college, he got a job but quit after 3 months because he didn't get along with his boss. He has had jobs on and off, but none of them lasted. My husband and I sometimes had to pay off Simon's debts. When my husband was alive, he often lectured Simon about his lifestyle. After my husband passed away, Simon rarely visited. In my husband's will, Simon only received a small inheritance, which might be why he was upset. I haven't kept in touch with him since. I supported Simon mentally and financially until he graduated from college, but I feel responsible for the fact that he has grown up to be so careless. I thought I had done enough for Simon until he became an adult and started his own life. I believed I didn't need to help him much after that. However, one day out of nowhere, Simon came back home without any warning. It had been 2 years since we last saw each other, and he looked different, tired and worn out. His style had changed too. He was wearing an aloha shirt, which stood out in our small town surrounded by farmlands. "Hey, I got married," he said. I was caught off guard by his news and was left in a state of shock and confusion. Seeing my surprised face, Simon clicked his tongue and called out to someone in his car. "Hey, it's okay now. Come over here." "I'm coming," a woman replied in a high-pitched voice. She stepped out of the car, dressed in a way that was hard to ignore, and looked out of place. To my surprise, a small child toddled along behind her. A child? What is going on? I thought. Look, the kid is too young for us to work properly, and we're always short of money. That's why we've come back home, Simon explained casually, as if it was no big deal. I couldn't believe how nonchalant Simon was about this surprising news. The little child, who seemed to be around 3 years old, had long hair, making it hard to tell if it was a boy or a girl. But on closer look, the child resembled Simon when he was young. "From today on, we'll be staying here," he announced. "Hello, I'm Rachel." "Nice to meet you," the woman said breezily, passing by me and entering the house as if she had always lived there. The little child tried hard to follow her, but she paid no attention and quickly went inside. Seeing this, I couldn't bring myself to turn them away, so I let them stay. As soon as they placed their luggage down, it seemed like they were about to go out. I quickly stopped them and asked for an explanation. After my husband passed away, Simon quickly met Rachel, and they started dating. Soon after, they found out she was pregnant. By the time they discovered the pregnancy, it was too late for an abortion, so they decided to have the baby. But things turned out to be more expensive than they expected, and they ran out of money, which led them back here. However, it seems they still had money for their own pleasures, just not for their child. "What? How can you be so irresponsible?" I exclaimed. "Cool, huh? Irresponsible. If you want the kid, he's a hassle. He can't even talk yet, and to be honest, just gets in the way," Simon replied. Hearing such heartless words from my own son was shocking. But what shocked me even more was seeing Rachel nod in agreement. "Well, that's how it is. Looking after and loving your grandchild is a grandma's job, right? Please help us out. We're going to grab a drink near the station." "Maxim, be good and stay with Grandma," Simon said. Despite my attempts to stop them, they quickly left, ignoring everything I had to say. The station is about a 15-minute drive from our house, definitely not walking distance. Considering it's a rural area, I wasn't even sure if taxis were available. And even if they were, would Simon and Rachel use one to come back? "Hey, Maxim," I called out tentatively to my grandson. He responded with a bright, adorable smile. A smile that reminded me so much of young Simon. Seeing his smile made me smile back, though it felt like my heart was being squeezed. Such a precious smile. I knew I had to protect him from now on. Seeing Maxim's innocent smile, I made a vow in my heart to do so. During our time living together, Maxim picked up household rules quickly. He was a very bright and great child. By the time he turned 3, he could speak very well, even better than most children his age. I couldn't help but adore him. As for my eldest son and his wife, they consistently ignored Maxim, treating him like a nuisance. They had no intention of working and contributed nothing to the household expenses. They would go out drinking every day and sometimes wouldn't return for several days. This bizarre situation had become normal for Maxim, and it seemed like he cautiously observed their moves to avoid getting close to them. I couldn't stand it any longer and spoke to Rachel. "Could you spend a little more time with Maxim? After all, you are his mother." "What? Why are you saying this? I'm busy, you know. You're the one taking care of him, right?" She said without even looking at me, busy with her manicure. Claiming to be busy when she spent her days doing whatever she pleased was quite the statement. Suppressing the urge to yell at her, I thought of Maxim and pleaded once more. Maxim just turned 3. Children that age cling to their mothers when they feel lonely. Oh please, I never wanted to be a mother in the first place. Maybe it's better if he calls you Mom, isn't it? "Are you serious?" I asked, stunned. "Oh, come on, of course," she said dismissively. "I'm not. You look so scary right now," Rachel said. She must have seen the anger on my face. In the end, Rachel and I couldn't have a proper conversation about Maxim, and she just left with Simon to go drinking as usual. Maxim didn't seem to mind that his parents left. He continued flipping through his picture book. When he found his favorite fish, he excitedly pointed it out to me and tried to tell me about it with his limited words. Seeing him happy was a relief, but I couldn't stop worrying about how Simon and Rachel planned to take care of him in the future. My worries only grew when I thought about Maxim's future. With my husband's inheritance, I could cover his school fees if needed. I had no choice but to be ready for anything. As I prayed at my husband's altar, I whispered to myself. Glancing at his photo, I felt as if he was encouraging me, and I nodded in response. For 2 years after deciding to take care of Maxim, I endured living with Simon and Rachel. I watched their reckless behavior. They went out every day, often taking money from my wallet without asking. During this time, I took care of Maxim, and he barely spoke to his parents. Maxim grew up quickly, and just before he was to start elementary school, a tragedy struck. "Hello, are you Maxim's grandmother? Maxim has been taken to the hospital. Can you come immediately?" On my way back from picking up adoption paperwork from the city office, I got a call that Maxim was in the hospital. It took 2 years of living together, multiple trips to the city office, and finally, the chance to adopt Maxim was within reach. I thought I could finally separate him from Simon and Rachel, but something terrible had happened. Holding back my emotions, I rushed to the hospital where Maxim had been taken. When I arrived and asked for details, the doctor said Maxim would need to be admitted. Confused, I asked, "Doctor, what's wrong with Maxim?" "What's the problem?" "I'll explain everything once his parents arrive," the doctor replied. Waiting for Simon and Rachel, the nurse approached with a worried look, which made me uneasy. She nodded at me and whispered something to the doctor. "What? The parents don't want to know about their own child's condition." The doctor's loud voice echoed through the hospital. Shocked by Simon and Rachel's indifference, realizing it was just as I expected, swallowing my pride, I knew I had to step up for Maxim. I explained our family situation to the doctor. At first, she seemed doubtful, but after seeing the detailed records I kept and realizing that Maxim's biological parents weren't coming, she believed me and explained Maxim's condition. "Ma'am, about Maxim's condition, please stay calm. The test results show cancer in his kidneys." "What? Cancer? This can't be," I said in shock, falling from the chair I was sitting on. The pain from the fall was nothing compared to the shock of hearing that my 5-year-old grandson had cancer. The nurse helped me get up, and the doctor continued speaking. "Fortunately, there's no sign that the cancer has spread. With immediate surgery, we can save his life." "Really? If he undergoes the surgery, will he be saved?" I asked. "Yes, however, we need the parents' consent for the operation. The cancer could progress quickly, so ideally, we'd like to operate as soon as possible after explaining this to the parents." Hearing this, I felt lost. I couldn't imagine Simon and Rachel showing any concern for Maxim. As I thought about what to do, I decided to visit Maxim's room first. There I saw something I couldn't have imagined. "Hey, I heard you have cancer. The doctor was talking to your grandma in another room. Your life's in danger, and if you keep trying to live, it'll cost us more money. So do us a favor," Simon said, his voice full of disdain. Hearing these heartless words made my rage build inside me, but Maxim, looking at his parents, had a somewhat cold and mature look in his eyes that seemed far beyond his 5 years. His parents seemed taken aback, but soon started laughing again. "Really, you're such an expensive kid," Simon said mockingly. "What are you saying? You two are the ones wasting money." I burst into the room, unable to hold back any longer. Simon looked surprised, but quickly turned to Maxim and continued mocking him. "We don't need such an expensive child like you," he said cruelly to his own son, who was bravely facing his illness. Besides Simon, Rachel was laughing hysterically. Seeing their outrageous behavior, I decided to cut ties with them forever. If that's how you feel, I, as his grandmother, will adopt him. Go ahead, Rachel said dismissively. He won't live long anyway. Just don't ask us for money for the funeral. She laughed loudly. Hearing this, an indescribable rage surged within me. From now on, we are strangers. Don't ever contact me again. Got it. Goodbye. The doctor told me about my grandson Maxim's health condition, but I didn't share it with my eldest son and his wife. Instead, I decided to cut ties with them. When they find out the truth, I'm sure they will regret their choices. As I gently hugged Maxim, I had a strong feeling that they would regret what they had done. I told Maxim about his cancer and the upcoming surgery. I reassured him not to worry about the cost and asked him to go through with the operation. Maxim, I want you to live. I know the surgery might be scary, but you will recover. I'll be right here with you. Grandma, if you're with me, I'm not afraid of anything. I'll go through the surgery and treatment, I promise, Maxim replied. Seeing Maxim trying to smile, and not to worry me even after hearing such harsh words from his own parents, I hugged him tightly. I also told him about the adoption process I had been preparing. Maxim seemed a bit worried at first, but eventually accepted it. That night, I discussed the adoption with my eldest son and his wife, who were drinking at home. They always said they didn't want a child because of the costs and didn't really care about Maxim. To make them leave my house, I offered them a significant amount of money to stay away from us forever. Without any hesitation, they signed the adoption papers and showed no signs of regret or attachment to Maxim. They looked happy about getting the money and quickly left the house. During the talk, they didn't even glance at or speak a word to Maxim, who was sick. Their lack of responsibility as parents saddened me, but I was relieved that one source of pain for Maxim was now gone. Soon after, Maxim had the surgery, which thankfully was successful. Being young, he recovered quickly and was soon ready to be discharged. Doctor, thank you so much, I said. Congratulations on your discharge, the doctor replied. I'm glad. If you ever feel something's wrong, come see me right away. Yes, understood, Maxim responded. During his stay at the hospital, Maxim grew close to the doctor and hugged him in gratitude. Once back home, Maxim lay down on his bed and said, Grandma, thank you so much for letting me have the surgery. Oh, don't mention it. I'm your parent now, and it's what parents should do. You must be tired today. Get some good rest, okay? I'll take a short nap, Maxim said, quickly falling into a deep sleep and snoring lightly. Not long after, I received a call from the hospital. Oh no, did I leave something at the hospital? I thought, answering the phone quickly. Hello, sorry for the sudden call. Actually, someone from a TV station came to the hospital, and they really wanted to meet Maxim. A person from a TV station? Why Maxim? I was completely puzzled, and my mind was filled with questions. After listening carefully, I found out that during Maxim's stay at the hospital, he became friends with a writer who was there for an interview. The writer had shared some of Maxim's stories online, and they were well received by the public. This led to discussions about turning them into a movie. I was utterly surprised. I hadn't known about this since Maxim had talked to the writer outside of my visiting hours. They told me that if it becomes a movie, Maxim wouldn't act in it, and they wouldn't use his real name. But since it's his story, people who know him might recognize it's about him. I see. Let me think about it. I'd like to discuss it with Maxim too, I said, wanting to think calmly. I decided to hang up the phone for now. Maxim woke up, rubbing his sleepy eyes. When I told him about the call from the hospital, his eyes sparkled with joy. Really? Is my story going to be a movie that everyone watches? It seems so. They said they'll hide your real name and make the movie. I explained, Why? It's fine. Let them use my name. Maxim replied, but if they use your real name, everyone will know about your illness and our family situation. I said, surprised by his reaction. Facing my surprise, Maxim answered with an innocent smile, because I want to tell everyone I have such a wonderful grandma like you. Oh, Maxim, thank you, I said, tears welling up in my eyes because of his kindness. I never expected to hear such heartwarming words from him. That night's dinner tastes saltier than usual, but I felt deeply happy and fulfilled. The movie preparations went smoothly. While the film didn't use Maxim's real name, he was introduced as the inspiration for the story. The movie became a huge hit after its release, with theaters packed every day. I watched it myself, and even though I already knew the story, it was still a moving experience. I couldn't hold back my tears watching the touching scenes of a loving grandmother and her smart grandson trying to survive together. Later, Maxim was invited to many events to talk about his story. On days when he didn't have school, he led a busy life wanting to support other kids his age who were fighting cancer. Having gone through it himself, he wanted to cheer them on. I did my best to support him. Thanks to the many lectures he gave, Maxim's bank account grew enough for a lifetime. With this money, he could focus on his treatment without worrying about finances if his illness came back. Even if something happened to me, there would be more than enough money for him to attend university without any concerns. Thinking about the future, I carefully stored his bank passbook, knowing it would be essential one day. After living this way for a while, my eldest son and his wife, who we hadn't heard from in about 3 years, suddenly showed up at our house. It seemed they had lost a lot of money through gambling and were now in serious debt. As soon as they saw Maxim, they approached him with the same sleazy smiles they always used. Oh, Maxim, you've grown so much. It's been a while since we last saw you. Don't you miss your mom and dad? Exactly, we took care of you when you were a baby. Don't you think you owe us? Rachel added. Despite abandoning Maxim as soon as they found out about his illness, my eldest son and his wife were still as selfish as ever. Facing them, Maxim gave them a cold look and said, "Who are you?" At his unexpected words, both Simon and Rachel were taken aback, their mouths tightening. Trying not to laugh at their reactions, I stepped between them and Maxim to continue the conversation. "Excuse me, but who might you be?" "Do you have some business with my son Maxim?" I asked. "What are you talking about? Maxim is my son. That makes him your grandson," Simon said angrily. But I looked at them with a cold stare. Under my gaze, Simon flinched for a moment, but then he turned to Maxim with a pleading tone. "Listen, Maxim, I messed up. I lost more money than I thought in horse racing. I'm in a really bad situation now. Can you help me out? If I had $30,000, it would be enough. Please." $30,000. That much, I exclaimed, shocked by the unexpected amount. No matter the reason, a debt of $30,000 from gambling was unthinkable. My late husband and I always warned Simon about gambling and going into debt, but it seemed like he didn't listen at all. The money Maxim saved came from the fees he received for giving lectures. He went through a lot to earn that money, sharing his painful memories in front of many people. I told Simon and Rachel, "You too can't use his hard-earned money just for your enjoyment." Then I firmly closed the front door in Simon's face. Outside, my eldest son and his wife started shouting and complaining, making such a loud noise that I had to call the police. Soon after, the noise stopped, and it seemed like they had given up and gone home. However, they didn't give up that easily. The next morning, they started causing a scene in front of our house again. Mom, please listen. I've changed. I'm turning over a new leaf. I'm sorry for everything. Please let me in, Simon pleaded. Maxim, I'm so sorry. From now on, I'll be with you and take care of you properly. So please let me in, Rachel added. They kept knocking on the front door early in the morning, annoying the whole neighborhood. Despite their constant noise, Maxim calmly continued his breakfast inside. Eventually, he went to the entrance, but I didn't hear the door unlock. Curious, I quietly checked what was happening. Instead of opening the door, Maxim was watching them from a small window near the entrance. They kept knocking, unaware of his gaze. Maxim then made a proposal. All right, I'll give you a few questions. If you answer even one correctly, we can live together. Really? Just like that? Despite everything, you're still a kid at heart, aren't you? What's the question? I'll answer anything, Simon replied, sounding relieved and cheerful. After a brief pause, Maxim asked the first question. First question, tell me my favorite and least favorite foods. Hey Rachel, you should know this, right? Simon stammered, clearly clueless. Rachel, trying to help, thought for a moment and answered confidently. Any mother would know that your favorites are pudding and chiffon cake. And you hate bell peppers, don't you? Hearing their answer, it was clear they didn't know Maxim at all. I sighed quietly without them noticing, feeling a mix of sadness and frustration. Maxim looked down at the couple from the window and asked, Are you sure that's your final answer? Of course. It's unthinkable for a mother not to know her own son's likes and dislikes, Rachel said confidently from outside. She seemed certain about her answer. Hearing this, Maxim laughed heartily. The couple, not expecting to be laughed at, were probably flustered. After a good laugh, Maxim, now calm, replied to Rachel, That's wrong. What a shame. What? You always looked so happy when there were cakes, didn't you? Rachel insisted. That was Dad's favorite, not mine. I used to have an egg allergy, so I don't eat things like pudding or cakes with eggs. I love the egg-free cakes Grandma makes, and I hate whipped cream. But I absolutely love bell peppers. Is that true? Rachel asked, shocked. Before coming to my house, Maxim was only given cheap instant porridges and slices of bread. I often wondered how he managed to stay healthy with such a poor diet. The reason Maxim didn't get sick was largely because of the meals he got at daycare. The principal noticed his diet was lacking and provided allergy-friendly meals, carefully monitoring his health. When she warned Rachel about her poor parenting and threatened to report her to child services, Rachel decided to stop sending Maxim to daycare and moved in with me. Hey, how long do you think we've been apart? How would I know what you like now? Rachel said, frustrated. That next question, what is my birthday? Maxim asked. Your birthday? Rachel and Simon looked confused. Maxim's birthday was actually today. Normally, a parent wouldn't forget their child's birthday, especially a mother. But despite this simple question, the couple showed no sign of knowing the answer. Why aren't you answering? It's such an easy question, isn't it? Maxim asked. Oh, of course, I know that, right, Simon? Rachel said, turning to Simon. Yes, of course, I know that, Simon replied in a panicked voice, but it was clear they didn't know the answer. If you don't know, you should just admit it, Maxim said. Even after waiting for about 10 minutes, they still didn't answer. Maxim muttered under his breath, and his sad expression showed that he was hurt that his own parents didn't remember his birthday. My heart ached for him. No, wait, I just had a brain fart. Of course, I know your birthday. Rachel tried to cover up her mistake. I know it, Rachel said. You just caught me off guard. It slipped my mind. Can you give me a hint? She asked, trying to cover up. In response to their silly excuses, Maxim laughed out loud, but I could see tears forming in his eyes. Feeling bad for Maxim, I quietly moved closer and held his hand. He was surprised to see me, but he nodded, wiped away his tears, and looked straight at his parents. Hey, real parents remember their child's birthday without needing hints. I've never been celebrated by you two, so I expected this, Maxim said. What? After all I did to give birth to you, and this is how you repay me? You should be grateful. Rachel snapped back, starting to get angry. Maxim gave her a cold look, and she went quiet. Well, here's the last question. It's an easy one, Maxim said. I was diagnosed with cancer and treated at a hospital. Which organ was affected? This was a question any parent should easily answer, especially since Maxim's illness had been on TV for several days. But their responses were unexpected. Wasn't it the heart? Simon asked. No, it was the stomach, right? Rachel added. I was so shocked I leaned back and looked up at the ceiling. Despite Maxim's story being a hot topic, my son and his wife showed they had no interest in him at all. Hearing this, Maxim must have thought, I never expected it to be this bad. I felt sorry for him, but to my surprise, he started laughing. Thanks, I get it now. It's worse than I thought, Maxim said. What? Did we miss something? Rachel asked, puzzled by Maxim's reaction. Maxim smiled, but his eyes were not smiling. It was kidney cancer. You claim to be my family, but you know nothing about me. The only one I consider my family is Grandma Emily. Shouldn't you be grateful I gave birth to you? Rachel asked, still angry. That's the point. To me, the only one I can call a parent is Grandma Emily, Maxim said. Oh, looks like my ride's here. Please don't bother coming here again. Maxim left them with those words and closed the window with a bang. Outside, my son and his wife were shouting in anger, but when the police arrived and warned them, they immediately stopped, and everything went quiet. I was worried that Maxim might have been hurt by this, but he looked relieved and smiled at me. What I said to them just now, that they are not my parents, is truly how I feel. I've always wanted to call you Mom, but I was too shy to say it. Can I call you that? Of course, Maxim, thank you, I replied, deeply touched by his words. I hugged Maxim tightly, tears in my eyes. Mom, you're squeezing too hard, he said, but he hugged me back just as tightly. As for those two, they claimed they had lost their son to me and were saying nonsense like I was being deceived by him. But everything they did to Maxim is documented and recorded, including testimonies from his kindergarten and the parenting diary I kept. The police reviewed the evidence and dismissed their claims. Still, the police contacted us to verify the facts. The officers seemed frustrated with the stubborn claims of my eldest son and his wife. After the call from the police, Maxim went to the police station alone to see them. When he came back, he looked refreshed. I said my final goodbyes to them and told the police everything about the terrible things they've done. They won't have a normal life for a while, I guess, Maxim said. He showed me the evidence he had mentioned. Shockingly, there was footage of the couple committing theft and exchanging money with a stranger. It seemed they believed they could live comfortably off the royalties if they could get Maxim on their side. They even planned to sell him to someone involved in shady dealings in the black market. Seeing their terrible plan, I was in shock and felt chills down my spine. I never thought my own son could be so cruel to his own child. Maxim spoke softly to me, seeing I was dumbfounded. I asked the manager to look into it, and we found out this shocking truth. I thought if you found out, you might be so shocked that you faint. That's why I kept it a secret. I'm sorry. It's okay, Maxim, I'd do anything for you and always have your back. It's even scarier to not know about such terrible things. I'm really sorry for hiding it from you all this time. The only one who worries about me this much is you, Mom. That's why I want to protect you too from now on," Maxim said with a slightly embarrassed look. Seeing Maxim's shy expression, tears of joy welled up in my eyes. Even though he has faced many hardships and seems mature for a 9-year-old, that shy expression made him look just like a child, which warmed my heart. My heart warmed as I thought about my eldest son and his wife. They were later found guilty of many other crimes and ended up serving nearly 9 years in prison. They never showed any remorse or apologized. The letters they sent, collected by Maxim's manager, still demand repayment for bringing him into the world. Maxim continues to visit hospitals to encourage sick children. He's now in middle school and has hit puberty, but his kind and honest nature remains the same. He's living a good life. Lately, it seems he has a girlfriend. I see him sneaking out for dates and can't help but think how cute he is. The cancer we worried about shows no signs of coming back, and his recovery is going well. Although it's impossible to say it will never return, regular checkups are essential. For now, he's living just like any other kid his age and seems happy every day. I still fuss over Maxim and nag him a lot. Naturally, there are times when he gets annoyed, but taking care of him gives my life meaning. I hope Maxim can bear with me a little longer. My biggest goal now is to live long enough to see Maxim's wedding. As a parent, if I'm being greedy, I'd love to see the face of Maxim's child, my great-grandchild. To make sure I stay healthy until then, I started going to the gym. Because of this, people around me are often surprised and call me a lively and young grandmother. For Maxim's sake, I'll strive to be a mother he can proudly show off for as long as possible. I'm going to keep pushing forward. Rent a cheap apartment and move out. If you're just going to stay at home, you don't deserve to live in this house, Kelly declared upon returning from the city. She was determined to push me out of the home I shared with my in-laws, eyeing my place. My in-laws, unfamiliar with remote work, and my husband Eric, who desired the house, sided with Kelly. Together, Eric, Kelly, and my in-laws continued to criticize me. Did they even realize who was paying the $7,500 monthly mortgage for this house? It hit me then, if I left, who would cover the mortgage? Living with people who made me feel so miserable seemed pointless. If they wanted me out, then so be it. I had endured enough, and my frustration had peaked. "I'll transfer the ownership and mortgage into your name," I informed Eric. With that decision, I divorced Eric, who was overjoyed, and left the house. Little did they know, an unexpected situation awaited them. My name is Lisa. I used to live with Eric, my husband, who is 3 years older than me. Our relationship began in an unconventional way. I met Eric while working at a company where he was employed by the cleaning service. My life took a difficult turn when I lost both parents in quick succession. First, my father was diagnosed with a terminal illness. While caring for him, my mother fell ill too, and despite her fight, they both passed away, leaving me alone. Having no siblings, I suddenly found myself all by myself, struggling to accept the reality that my parents were gone. After their passing, I would often think of them at random moments and tear up. However, I tried to hide my feelings from those around me, who were being considerate. I forced myself to smile all the time while at work. The first time my husband, Eric, spoke to me, I was trying not to let anyone notice as tears welled up in my eyes. I stood in the hallway during a break, staring blankly out the window, lost in thoughts of my parents. I had seen Eric at work before, and we had exchanged nods, but we had never spoken, and I didn't even know his name yet. Eric approached me as I looked out the window and asked, "Are you okay? You seem a bit down." In response to Eric's gentle inquiry, I found myself talking about my parents. Maybe it was easier because he was a stranger whose name I didn't even know. When Eric heard about my parents' passing, he sympathized, saying he was close to his own parents and could understand the loneliness. I was glad that Eric listened to my story. After that, we started having brief conversations whenever we saw each other at work, and it didn't take long before we started meeting outside of work. Soon after we started dating, Eric introduced me to his parents. As Eric had mentioned, he seemed to have a good relationship with them. His parents, aware of my loss, were considerate and invited me to visit them anytime. I quickly grew close to my in-laws, and without a formal proposal, it naturally led to me marrying Eric. After the wedding, we rented an apartment near my in-laws and started our life together. After getting married, I quit my job and switched to a company that allowed me to work fully remotely from home. I did this considering the possibility of having children with Eric in the future. I told Eric about my career change, but it seems he didn't quite understand it. For now, he just knows that I work from home using my computer. Since my salary didn't change after switching jobs, I decided to take care of the living expenses. Eric earned less than I did, so we agreed that I would pay for our expenses, while Eric would save his salary, except for what he spent on social activities. Eric didn't have any expensive hobbies, and before we married, his social expenses were mostly just dates with me or going out with friends. Eric himself said he was okay with me managing our savings, so this is how we handled our finances. Working from home was all positive for me. Above all, I was happy that I could enjoy leisurely meals with Eric when he came home. This wouldn't have been possible if I were still working at my previous company. Before marriage, I often made simple meals just for myself, but now, wanting to please Eric, I found myself wanting to cook more elaborate dishes. Our life together was peaceful, but then, a few years into our marriage, something shocking happened. My in-laws' house was completely destroyed in a fire. Fortunately, my in-laws were unharmed, but they lost all their possessions and irreplaceable memories, like photo albums. For a while, my in-laws stayed in our apartment, and they were deeply upset. I wanted to cheer up the two people who had helped me heal from the loss of my own parents, so I did everything I could to care for them. I cooked, of course, and also took care of the household chores during breaks from work, making sure they felt comfortable. On weekends, Eric and I would go out with them. However, my in-laws felt like they were being a burden and struggled to regain their usual cheerfulness. They often mentioned that they couldn't stay with us forever and were concerned about imposing on us. So my husband Eric and I decided to build a house to live in with my in-laws. Until now, my in-laws had never brought up the idea of living together, but Eric and I had been considering it. In preparation, I had been saving from my salary, separate from the savings my husband was making. Thinking it was better to get a mortgage sooner rather than later, I suggested that we use this opportunity to build a house. My in-laws were delighted, and the conversation quickly came to an agreement. The house they had lived in was a charming wooden structure built by my great-grandfather. It had been fine when they were younger, but as they aged, they started experiencing various health issues. Therefore, they had many requests for the new house. Eric, too, wanted to add various features, thinking that if we were going to build it, we might as well do it right. Ultimately, the cost ended up being much higher than anticipated. Still, convincing myself that we would be living there for a long time, I agreed to build a house that met all three of their requests. I began to sense something was off around this time. Eric was excessively claiming to his parents, Rachel and Kyle, that he was the one building the house, and they were constantly thanking only him. Even though the house and the mortgage were in my name, and the down payment came from my savings, it seemed like Eric hadn't mentioned this to Rachel and Kyle at all. Because of Eric's insistent claims that it was his house, Rachel and Kyle started pressuring me to thank Eric as well. I appreciated Eric, not just for the money. I paid more because I could, not because I wanted gratitude from Eric or Rachel and Kyle. However, even when Rachel and Kyle said things to me, Eric didn't stand up for me. Instead, he jokingly said, "That's right, you should be grateful to me for letting you live in a new house." I was definitely upset after hearing these falsehoods repeatedly. I understand that Eric has his pride, so I didn't ask him to tell his parents the whole truth. But I did ask him to stop making it seem like I was doing nothing. However, Eric, feeling more confident because of our new house, just wouldn't listen. Then I found out that Eric was telling a terrible lie to his parents. He incredibly told them he worked at the same company where I used to work, which is considered a well-known major corporation. True, Eric still has dealings with that company, but as I began to notice Eric's lies and his inflated pride, I started to feel increasingly distrustful of him. I also felt uncomfortable because his parents always seemed to favor him. Still, I thought once we moved into our new home, the issue of who built the house wouldn't come up anymore, so I just kept enduring patiently. However, once our new home was completed and we started living there, their attitude towards me clearly began to change. It seemed like my in-laws, just like Eric, didn't understand the concept of working from home. They thought I was just playing around because I didn't go out during the day and was always at my computer. Eric had been complaining to them that Lisa is just playing around all day, and they seemed to have completely believed it. Before we moved, they never said anything, maybe because they felt I was taking care of them. But the sarcasm increased as soon as we moved. They would say things like, "Eric built such a fine house, and you just stay in and play around. Must be nice. Why don't you work a little and help Eric out?" Even when I was working on my computer, they would come to my room just to make snide remarks. The discomfort made me leave the house more and more, working from a cafe instead. I repeatedly asked Eric to clear up his parents' misunderstanding. While Eric might not understand the work I do, it's my salary that's supporting his and his parents' lifestyle. All I needed was for him to tell his parents that. But Eric just said, just let them say whatever they want, still not listening. Since they thought I wasn't working, I got stuck with all the housework, and his parents started bossing me around. I couldn't take it anymore and finally stood up to them. Eric was there too, and I thought he would finally take my side, seeing how upset I was. But instead, he yelled at me, "Don't talk back." Then he thrust a completed divorce paper at me, threatening divorce if I didn't comply. I had never seen Eric so angry before, and his behavior completely intimidated me, making me give in to him and his parents' demands. From that day on, both his parents and Eric's attitudes towards me turned utterly cold. The only time I felt seen and could find some solace was when I was working at my computer. I immersed myself in work to forget the treatment I received from my in-laws and husband. One day, my sister-in-law Kelly, who had been living in the city, came back to visit. She was coming to see the new house and planned to stay for a while. My in-laws immediately started complaining about me to her. They said Lisa is always cooped up in her room playing on her computer. Does she even realize whose generosity allows her to live in such a nice house? What on earth is she doing on that computer all day? Playing games? Is she some kind of nerd? That's just weird. We don't really understand all this, but maybe she's one of those nerds. You think if she's always on her computer, she must be one, right? Isn't she ashamed of not working? Trying to escape their loud conversation meant for me to hear, I went to my room. Then I heard something even more shocking. They said, wasn't Lisa just a cleaner at Eric's company? It's amazing how she lies about working from home. She couldn't possibly have the skills for that. Kelly was talking as if my and Eric's roles were completely reversed. Since Eric had told his parents he worked at a major corporation, maybe he had also lied that I was a cleaner. The real liar here was Eric. I wanted to tell this to Rachel and Kelly, but given everything that had happened, I doubted they would believe me. So I just gave up. Ever since Kelly came to visit, my place at the dining table was taken over by her, and I couldn't even eat at the same time as everyone else. While they ate the meals I prepared during my work breaks, I would be secluded in my room, continuing my work. This went on for a week, and the day for Kelly to return to the city came. But suddenly, Kelly declared, I'm going to live in this house too. After staying here, I found it quite comfortable. I just quit my job, so I've decided to move back here. Kelly said she had been working in the apparel industry, but got tired of the office drama and decided to take a break. Her family home was being rebuilt, and when she returned and saw our new house, she found it more luxurious than she had expected. Leaving the city to start a business here could be good. At my level, I can work from anywhere, she said. My in-laws, Rachel and Kyle, were thrilled with Kelly's words, and Eric seemed quite pleased with the compliments about the house too. However, there was no designated room for Kelly in this house. Until now, she had been staying in the guest room, but if she were to live here permanently, another room for Kelly would be needed, and the house had no spare rooms. Kelly had realized this after living with us for a week. She told me, I'll live here, so you should leave, with a smug, malicious grin. People who just play around at home don't deserve to live in a house like this. You should find some cheap apartment somewhere and live there. No, I said. This house is mine because I started. Rachel cut me off. That's a good idea. You do nothing but stay at home all day. Rachel sided with Kelly, leaving me no room to argue. I tried desperately to explain my job, but Kelly, who had just said that work could be done from anywhere, wouldn't understand about working from home. Just because I'm not going out, they say I'm not working. They're trying to corner me with such an absurd argument. After everything that's happened, I'm really starting to get angry. Eric doesn't try to speak the truth, just stands there laughing and watching the situation. Until now, I kept quiet considering Eric's position. But I finally told Rachel, Kyle, and Kelly that this house was built in my name. I'm paying for all the mortgage and all the living expenses. The down payment came from my savings, and Eric hasn't paid a single penny. Seeing me speak up to this extent, Eric was clearly panicked. However, the only things that came out of his mouth were words to berate me and self-serving statements to hide the truth. He shouted at me, calling me noisy, telling me to shut up, and calling me a liar. Eric was obviously flustered, and it was clear he was hiding something. Yet Rachel, Kyle, and Kelly still defended him, calling me the liar. No matter how many times I tried to explain it wasn't a lie, they didn't believe me. That's when it struck me. If I left, who would pay the monthly mortgage of $7,500? There was no reason for me to keep living with these people, enduring such unpleasantness. If this house is supposedly built by Eric, who works at a major corporation, maybe it should all truly be his. With that thought, I decided to sign the divorce papers that Eric had pushed on me. Intending to threaten me, when I offered to change the house's title to Eric's name, he was so delighted he almost danced. He must have thought the house would now fully become his own, in name and reality. He's not wrong, but Eric misunderstood one thing. Initially, to change the mortgage to his name, we tried to go through the process together. But Eric disliked the complex procedures and told me to handle it alone. Just you go and listen to all that complicated stuff. It's just a name change, right? Get it ready for my signature only, he said. Since that wasn't possible, I took the reluctant Eric to the bank and a legal professional for consultation. Throughout, Eric didn't listen to the explanations and just played with his smartphone. When it came to signing the documents, he finally became eager. "If I sign this, the house will be in my name, right?" he asked. After I confirmed, he happily signed the documents. Once all the procedures are completed, both the house and the mortgage will finally be Eric's. I've explained it several times, but I wonder if Eric has truly realized it. He was ecstatically reporting to Rachel, Kelly, and Kyle. Even after hearing this, how can they still believe that Eric works at a major corporation and I'm unemployed? I watched this scene with a feeling of astonishment. After changing the house and mortgage to his name, I filed for divorce. "We're going on a trip to celebrate this, so you better move out while we're gone," Eric said. Waiting for the procedures to finalize, Eric took Rachel, Kelly, and Kyle on a ridiculous divorce celebration trip. They were apparently going abroad and wouldn't be back for about 15 days. During that time, I sold all the furniture and appliances I had brought into the house and packed my belongings into the car. Ready to leave, while handling various procedures in parallel, I was also looking for a new house. I moved immediately after packing my belongings. The place I chose for my fresh start is the top floor of a high-rise condo. It was a stroke of luck that this condo, worth about $8 million, was available. However, given the timing, I thought it must have become available just for me and decided to boldly purchase it. For the past few years, living with Rachel, Kyle, and Eric has been stressful. So I was thrilled about my new life ahead. In fact, I had an inheritance left by my deceased parents that I had been investing in. Using that inheritance even before marrying Eric, initially intended as just a way to earn some pocket money, these investments turned out to be a huge success. Now my assets amount to several $1,000,000. I had planned to use that money for a relaxed early retirement with Eric in the future. I had kept this asset a secret, intending to surprise Eric. But now, I'm truly glad I never mentioned it. If I had told them, Rachel, Kyle, and Kelly might have joined forces to take my assets. Living with that family, I painfully learned just how careless they are with money. The house I lived in with Eric and his parents was decorated mainly based on their preferences, so it wasn't to my taste. With the move to the condo, I took the opportunity to create a space I love, carefully crafting the interior to my liking. Now it has become the perfect space surrounded only by things I adore. Above all, there's no one around to make snide remarks, so I can happily work from home. Once things settle down, I'm planning to join a cooking class or yoga studio. Finally, in this enjoyable and free time, I have regained a peaceful mind for the first time in years. The call from Eric came the night they returned from their trip abroad. He must have realized that the furniture and appliances were gone. Upon returning home, he demanded them back, but I paid no attention. Everything was bought with my money, so it's my choice to do what I want with it. I didn't want to leave anything of mine in the house of those who had caused me so much suffering. Not even the furniture and appliances. Of course, they were unnecessary for my new home. When I told Eric that I had already sold them, he still demanded I buy them back immediately. "It's impossible. You, working at a major corporation, should just buy new ones," I retorted and then hung up the phone. That day, Eric called several times, but I ignored all of his calls. Months had passed since Eric and his family returned from their overseas trip. I had completely forgotten about my previous life and was having a great time getting along well with my neighbors. That day, I was returning from a cooking class I attended, invited by a friend who lived on the floor below. Suddenly, I received a call from Eric. Although I was suspicious, I answered, thinking there might be an issue with paperwork that needed attention. As soon as I answered, Eric shouted in a loud voice, "What is this all about?" It was just like the day they returned from their overseas trip. Wondering if there was anything else besides the furniture and appliances that could have angered my husband, I decided to listen closely. It turns out he had finally noticed the amount of the loan repayments when he opened a letter that had arrived at the house. He saw that the loan repayment amount was listed as $7,500 per month, which is why he called in a panic. "Wasn't the loan already paid off?" he exclaimed. "Of course not." "The bank explained everything clearly, didn't they?" I replied, "That's impossible. I never heard about it with the fire insurance in your savings." "Why didn't you pay off the mortgage?" he shouted. "No way. That's impossible. Do you even realize how much that house was worth?" I responded, shockingly. It seems Eric believed the mortgage was already paid off, despite the bank's detailed explanation, which he had nodded to. I was sitting right next to him, watching and listening, so I remember it well. Even if Eric wasn't paying attention, he had already signed the mortgage transfer, so it was too late now. Eric kept trying to find a way out of the mortgage payments, but there was nothing I could do about it. Eventually, he seemed to realize that he had no choice but to repay the loan and fell silent, seemingly frustrated. "I thought you'd be struggling to find a place to live," Eric said, clearly under the impression that I was in a dire situation. The reason Eric could freely spend his salary until now was because I was the one covering our living expenses. Even after our divorce, I have no trouble living on my own. It's too late for him to realize that he was relying on me for everything. I wondered what kind of life my pretentious ex-husband Eric had been leading these past few months with his parents, Rachel and Kyle. Most likely, they were living luxuriously, doing whatever Kelly suggested. And then he realized there was a mortgage to be paid. I wonder what Eric is going to do now, I thought, as if it were someone else's problem. Since we're practically strangers now, I didn't care at all about how much trouble my ex-husband and his parents, Rachel and Kyle, were in. Seeing him so frustrated, I decided to tell him the truth. Too bad. I moved into a luxury condo with the money I made from a successful investment, I said. While he was speechless, I hung up the phone. There were no calls from him after that, so I thought he had managed somehow. But then, out of the blue, he called again. When I answered, wondering what it was about this time, it turned out their house had been seized, and he was in a panic. In the background, I could hear the desperate voices of his parents, Rachel and Kyle, and his sister Kelly. What should I do? "Help me, Lisa," my ex-husband pleaded desperately. A person claiming to be an enforcement officer was visiting their house, and I could hear Rachel, Kyle, and Kelly addressing the officer in the background. According to this officer, the house was about to be put up for auction, with details like the auction date and bidding period to be decided once the auctioneer was determined. After the ownership transferred, my ex-husband and his family would be evicted from the house. I thought they must have received warning letters leading up to this. But when I asked my ex-husband, he sounded confused and said they hadn't arrived. However, that couldn't be right, and after persistent questioning, he finally admitted in a small voice, maybe they did arrive. It turned out he had intentionally ignored the letters, realizing they were about loan repayments. The envelopes were already open. Before I saw them, I thought someone was taking care of the payments. Probably Rachel, Kyle, and Kelly thought the same. As my ex-husband, eventually, a demand for the lump sum repayment of the loan arrived. It seems my ex-husband and his family were aware of it, but continued to ignore it, thinking someone else would pay for it. So the house was finally seized. Can't you do something now, like pay it off? You could pull everyone's savings together. There's got to be a way, he begged. I couldn't hide my frustration at my ex-husband's helpless tone. When I suggested they pull their savings to pay off the loan, all he could say was, "It's impossible." Apparently, Rachel and Kyle had squandered their savings on an extravagant overseas trip. They were planning to rely on their son, who they thought worked at a big company, for their future. It was all just their assumption. Kelly, his sister, who claimed she quit her job to come back home, was actually fired for embezzling company funds. She talked as if she had been hugely successful in the city, but in reality, she was just a modestly paid accountant in a small to mid-sized company. She got hooked on visiting nightclubs and gradually embezzled money from her company to splurge on them. Even though she had returned home relying on her parents, Rachel and Kyle, she had the nerve to make grand claims. As for my ex-husband, after our divorce, he pretended to be working at a large corporation and started dipping into his savings to cover living expenses. Rachel, Kyle, and Kelly lived lavishly, and the money he had saved while we were married was completely gone. Then came the demand for the lump sum repayment of the loan. As their financial situations came to light, it seemed like the focus shifted from the court case to blaming each other. In the midst of this, my ex-husband started clinging to me. "Please, Lisa, you're living in that high-rise luxury condo now, right? Let's all live together there again," he pleaded. I refused. "We're divorced now, and as far as I'm concerned, we're strangers." Although I had felt a bit sorry for him earlier, I definitely didn't want to live with those people ever again. Hearing the voices of my ex-in-laws, Rachel, Kyle, and Kelly, in the background, I felt more resolved and firmly declined my ex-husband's offer. Upon hearing my refusal, Rachel, Kyle, and Kelly immediately started hurling insults at me. I heard various derogatory terms like heartless scammer and thief. Perhaps out of spite for being rejected, my ex-husband joined them in berating me. The noise over the phone was unbearable. Despite everything being the result of their own actions, there was no sign of remorse from them. Eventually, all four of them started blaming each other, leaving me out of it and arguing among themselves. I decided then and there to never involve myself with these people again. I quietly hung up the phone and blocked my ex-husband's number. A few days later, I came across a concerning headline in a corner of the newspaper. The article about a father and son getting into a fistfight and the police being called made me suspect it was about my ex-husband and his father. I decided to contact a mutual acquaintance who lives near my ex-in-law's home. Sure enough, the incident reported in the newspaper was about them, and it happened after I hung up the phone on my ex-husband. The article mentioned that a neighbor noticed the fight and called the police, leading to their arrest. My ex-husband, his father, Rachel, and Kelly, who tried to intervene, all sustained injuries that would take about 3 weeks to heal completely. After receiving a stern warning from the police, they were released. However, the incident making the newspapers meant my ex-husband faced severe reprimands at his workplace. Although he wasn't fired, the cause of the fight was exaggerated and quickly spread throughout the company. My ex-husband feels uncomfortable at work, but can't afford to quit due to financial needs. Eventually, a buyer was found for their house, and they were forced to move out. They managed to find a new place, but it's an old, cramped, bug-infested apartment, a far cry from their previous home. The family of 4 began their new life there. Bugs appearing daily in the rooms are causing Kelly and Rachel to make such a fuss that they have already received complaints from the neighbors. They tried to work and rent a new house quickly, but both in-laws and Kelly seemed to get into trouble at work and end up being fired, especially Kelly, with her past of embezzling company funds becoming widely known. She is finding it difficult to get rehired. It looks like they will have to continue living on my ex-husband's income alone. My ex-husband seems to be trying to find out where I live, asking our mutual acquaintances persistently. They have warned me to be careful. Even if my ex-husband finds my condo, he'll just be turned away by the full-time concierge. I gratefully accepted the advice from my acquaintance and made sure to ask the concierge to be on the lookout. With this, the turmoil with my ex-husband and his family finally comes to an end. It hasn't even been a year since I left that house, but it already feels like a distant past event. I've completely adapted to life in my luxury condo, enjoying my days filled with hobbies and work. I plan to enjoy my carefree single life for a while without thinking about marriage.